Sensuality is an enriching experience that transcends mere physical touch. It invites us to explore openness and vulnerability, creating deeper connections with others. By engaging in mindful touch, we enhance our awareness of each other's desires and boundaries. This practice cultivates intimacy as it encourages honest communication and emotional safety. Each caress becomes a dialogue between bodies, transcending words and allowing us to connect on a profound level. Embracing the art of sensuality fosters trust, reigniting passion and curiosity in relationships. It's a journey of discovery, inviting us to celebrate the beauty of human connection through the transformative power of touch.
Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Pleasure Principles, where we dive deep into the heart of relationships, intimacy, and the personal growth. I'm your host, Avik, and today we are getting real raw, real honest, and real transformative. So we have got an amazing guest in the house today, Tammy Cox. So welcome to the show, Tammy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. So, Tammy, before we start our conversation, I'd quickly love to introduce you to all of our listeners. Dear listeners, Tammy is a transformational coach who's all about healing childhood wounds to create thriving and loving relationships. So, her personal journey from trauma to triumph will inspire you, and trust me, you do not want to miss this one. So, wait, let's get started. Welcome to the show again, Tammy.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So, Tammy, to start with, if you can share your story, what was the turning point that made you realize that your childhood traumas were affecting your adult relationships?
So I became a mom when I was 26. And that's really where everything started. All the bells started to alarm, so to speak. I started to get really bad triggers. I just almost like I was twitching. They were so bad. And so when you are a child that experiences a lot of trauma and then you kind of tuck it away, right, in a nice, neat box and leave that. Oh, that's the past. And then you go to try and live your life. That's exactly what I did. And what happened for me is when I became a wife and when I became a mom, that box started to smoke and rattle. And I wasn't okay. I was just not okay. And I came to the place where I was lowest of lows. I had a very bad postpartum with my second daughter and went into a deep, dark depression. And I was basically contemplating taking my life. And I said, either I'm going to fix this or I'm going to take my life because I cannot live another day like this. And so I kind of was put in a situation where I was forced to look at what was going on within me. And I tried many different things to try and fix or heal. You think of talk therapy and counseling and books and seminars and you name it, I did it. And it would just get a little bit better, but then everything would come flooding back and nothing was giving me lasting results. And so it wasn't until I started doing the deep inner work, really working on my trauma wounds, that I started to transform. For me, that's what it was. And so obviously after, bringing myself from the darkest of darks, I like to call hell on earth, to, healing myself and healing my marriage and healing my family. I really began to experience heaven on earth for the first time, peace and joy and these things I never understood or even felt. So, that's just a little piece that's a little short version.
Okay. Understood. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing this. Yeah. And also, while we're discussing this. How did healing your inner child transform your marriage and the overall connection with the others? If you can share.
Yeah. Well, it changed everything. Basically, what was triggered within me was the little girl. So inside of us, we have every age we've ever been, sort of like a little Russian doll. If you open up one, there's another inside and another inside, another inside to infinity, right? And for those of us who experienced, I'd say even people who haven't experienced a really traumatic childhood, we all have that little boy or little girl within us who's in pain. If we haven't dealt with the pain that we experience in those first 5 years of life, what happens is they just remain within us in pain. And so I would get triggered by all sorts of things that my husband would do, because that's the closest relationship we have, right? We can't escape our spouse. We share everything with them, including a bed, including a room, right? We cannot get away from them. And so they're the closest mirror. And it was my biggest source of contention. The biggest pain point was my marriage because I was forced to face the deepest parts of me. And so when I changed that, it changed every relationship that I had, the relationship I had with my kids, my husband, because I wasn't this broken person inside. So every relationship that I had shifted from that.
Got it. So also on this side, I mean, some people believe that we should just move on from the past. So why do you think that healing this deep wounds is so essential?
Well, it's so emotion gets trapped in our body. Our body as the temple, it, holds really all the information that we've ever experienced in our life. If you think about the subconscious mind, it forgets nothing. So even though you might not have memories of certain things within your DNA, you hold all of it. So if you do not heal the negative past, you take that pain, that emotion that lives and resides within you, you take it into every single relationship, meaning your relationship with money, your relationship to every human, your relationship to your outer experience. You take that pain with you and you see it through the lens of pain, right? That's why you see different kinds of people in the world, but if we could just narrow it down to people who see more positive versus people who see more negative, what is the lens that they're perceiving life through? And if you have a lot of undealt with emotions, what that means is it kind of taints the lens in which you perceive the world. You kind of carry this pain with you everywhere you go, and it's actually felt by everyone in your life. For me, the way that it was expressed through me was a lot of anger. I had to be right all the time. Anytime anyone would say anything that I perceived as negative, I was so sensitive. I was triggered by everything. And so it looks different on different people based on their pain and the way that they perceive it. But essentially, you're kind of holding yourself into the negative past instead of being brand new right here in the present moment. So it taints everything. And it also goes from generation to generation, because when a person heals, they're not only healing themselves, but they're healing the lineage in the past and they're healing the lineage in the future. So like I said, when I healed my children as well. They actually became different versions of themselves because of the inner work that I did. Because whether we know it or not, we pass on these traumas and this pain on in the generations.
True, exactly. And for our listeners who might feel stuck, so how can someone start identifying those deep-rooted wounds that are impacting their relationships? You can share.
Well, I find with my clients, what I find is the deepest ones are in the first 5 years of life. And then they kind of compact as the life goes on. So if we could go back to the root cause of them within those first 5 years, what we can do is we could just kind of We could take the emotion out right then and there. And this is called neutralizing trauma, where we go back through the traumatic events and take the emotion out of it. So, I always tell people, yes, you could do some work at home by yourself or whatever, but the best way is to be guided through this. I've always had mentors as well as having mentees. I believe in this chain, this link chain where I'm pulling you up, she's pulling me up, she's pulling her up. Like we have this link where we get to help each other rise. But what I find is if someone doesn't have someone to sort of hold their hand through it, then they don't tend to do all the work. Or, when it gets hard, they kind of bow out. So I think first and foremost, find someone, if not someone that you, that can help you to obtain these, working through these inner wounds, then a friend that you could really start unpacking, or a journal even, somewhere to start where you start to kind of understand the patterns, like start taking it pattern by pattern. Look at your life, look at the patterns that have really caused a lot of pain for you. For some of the women I work with, they either haven't been able to find love, or they find love and somehow sabotage it, or they find toxic people, they attract toxic people. They have some sort of pattern. Sometimes it's in the friendship relationships, in the inner family relationships. Find your patterns, look at them, and then start to trace them back in time. And if you can trace them back to those first 5 years, it will be absolutely beneficial to you.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, what's the first practical step that someone can take when they realize that their childhood experiences are still haunting their adult life?
Yeah. I'm sorry, what is a step?
Yeah, practical step. Yeah.
Practical step. So if you don't have the means to hire someone to help you, I would get a journal. There's some great journals out there, like shadow working journals, that will help you to kind of identify the traumas that link. But it kind of depends on the pain point that you're really looking at. Like if your biggest issue has been, like a lot of my clients, finding love, or some of them, they have found love, they're in a relationship, but it's not going so great. The marriage is falling apart. They're not happy. It's kind of miserable. They feel stuck. But I want you to pinpoint the emotions that it brings up in you. And then write out those emotions in a journal. Okay. Whatever this pain point is, write them out and get very detailed. Then I want you to ask your subconscious mind, where do these emotions originate? And just sit and meditate on that until the memories come up, and they will come up unless that you have suppressed them for a long time. It might take a little more work, but start to reflect on where, and then take a look at that memory, right? And what's great about emotion is that once the emotion is felt, think about emotions, energy and motion. That means they need to be emoted. They need to be moved. That's why they're in the body until they're fully felt. So if you go to the emotion and take it one step further, ask yourself, where in my body am I storing this emotion? I usually have my clients put their hand on it, and then I say, what color is it? Identify the color that's directly connected to the emotion. And then I ask them to pull it out. And it may be silly to some people. They're like, I'm pulling out an imaginary color. You're actually not, because the first two languages that you learn when you're born into this world is emotion and color. And so that's the reason why colors exist in our reality. So if you just simply pull out that color, and you can minimize it, you could spin it, do something with it to move it out of your body and to reframe it. But I find that this is a really helpful technique. In fact, on my podcast, I do this technique on just about every person that comes on, because it just has the quickest effect that any other modality that I have found has. But that's just a starting place.
That's awesome. Yeah. And some people also are afraid like healing might open old wounds. So can the process ever feel like it's kind of making things worse before it gets better?
Um, yeah, kind of. Yes and no. So when you first
Okay.
start on your healing journey, I've definitely noticed that sometimes people get there. It's kind of like opening Pandora's box. Like if you've been ignoring that thing for all this time, right? And it's been festering and fester. Think about any wound that you've kind of just let go of and it sits there and it festers and it gets worse and worse and you're just ignoring it.
Mm,
Yeah, when you first start looking at it, it might feel hard and it might feel painful. But what I
mm,
find with people is the more work they do, the more they just kind of get used to the discomfort of the initial like sting. You know what I'm saying? And so if I could give anyone advice, it's like don't be scared by treating those wounds. It may feel hard at first. I think for most people, they experience that it's hard at first, but it is going to benefit you. Like thinking about this is what most of my clients experience right from the very beginning is like
mm,
they're carrying around this huge load on their back. And when we start taking out the bricks of that load, and they're like, oh, so light. I feel so free. It's like
mm,
that's worth everything to me. Yes, it'll be a little hard, but if I told you that we could exchange those bricks for like peace
mm.
and joy and bliss and pleasure, right? If I told you that we could exchange it for those things, like, why wouldn't you want that?
True.
Your life can
Exactly.
only get better.
Yeah, definitely. So, also on this, from your experiences, how does unresolved trauma affect the intimacy and emotional ability in the relationships?
Everything. The majority of us, I'd say almost everyone, except maybe the new little beings being born onto the earth right now, we have all these survival methods, ways to protect ourselves. And so we almost all have these walls all around our hearts. And even though we enter into these romantic relationships,
Mm,
marriage, these very intimate relationships, we don't realize that we have all these barriers and high, thick walls around our heart. And it's really our job. And I don't feel like we can do this until we start looking at the trauma and the old wounds. It's our job and our gift to start to break those walls down. How can we expect our children not to be guarded and not to be guarded with those thick walls around their heart if we're still holding on to ours? So I believe it's our duty and privilege to our children, to the next generation, to start working on breaking those walls down. But I know for me, just I came from my upbringing was abusive, and controlling. And I didn't feel like my home was safe growing up. And so when I entered into my marriage, I had those same feelings. They didn't go away. Just because I'm in a new situation doesn't mean I feel something different. And so for me, I didn't feel safe. My husband wasn't safe for me until I started going through my own healing process and tearing those walls down around my heart. So it's just our perception of the outside world, but we are going to perceive it through the eyes of that little child in those first 5 years. We can't think that we're going to grow up and be adults and have an entirely different perspective. That's not the way it works unless we've worked on it. So we all get to do that and start to work on the walls around our heart, because I believe almost every adult walking the face of the earth right now has that to some
mm.
level or degree or another.
Wow, that's awesome. And also, I have heard that listeners say, I don't even know where to start, and I'm too much scared to dig into my past. So, this kind of scenario, how would you guide someone's who's overwhelmed by the thought of healing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find what I find to be
Mhm.
true is that you have to be in a lot of pain and have
Yeah.
experienced a lot of pain and struggle. And like I said, pure hell on earth before you get to the place where you're like, I can't live another day like this. I have to change. There's got to be something better. I believe we kind of
Yeah.
have to get to that place before we're going to change. We have to be in that much pain before we're like, no more. I can't live with this pain anymore. That's how
Mm.
that was my stance. That's where I was at. And I see it a lot with my clients where they're like, I can't live with this pain anymore. I just can't. And so even though they may not feel ready, I don't think anyone, it's kind of like being a parent. Who's ready to be a parent? You're not ready to be a parent. I remember when they first put the baby in my arms, like, I was like,
Mm.
oh, crap, I'm going to have to keep this thing alive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's no, I don't think anyone is ready. I think we do it because we're absolutely desperate and because we know we don't want to pass all of our stuff on to our kids. And that was another part of it for me. I looked at these, I have three daughters. I looked at their beautiful faces and I did not want to pass on what had been inherited to me. I just didn't want that for them. And so they were a huge part of my inspiration to change me was I could have totally went down the path of my father and been just as abusive as him and controlling. In fact, I saw him in me at certain points. He actually died when I was 11. Um, but I saw certain parts of him within me and it scared me so much. And so that was my motivation on top of just not wanting to live. That we got to find some reason to heal ourselves. And if we can't heal ourselves for ourselves' sake, then heal yourself
Mm.
for your kids, for your parents, for the world, something bigger, something outside of you. But just
Yeah.
know that healing creates this ripple effect. Like I said, when I healed, my everyone in my house healed, everyone in my life who I was in a relationship healed on some level, but everyone
Yeah.
had to change because I now showed up as a different person. Right. And so when you understand that you are creating something much bigger than you by choosing to heal yourself, maybe that could be more motivation for you to choose this path.
Exactly. So, what role does self-compassion play in your, I mean, in this journey, whole journey?
Self
And
compassion.
yes, self-compassion.
All of it. Because
Okay.
when you can when someone starts to go into this work and starts to heal themselves, I see a
Mm.
lot of people have so much contempt for themselves. They're so mean to themselves. They're brutal. Think about your thought process. Are you sitting there in your mind just
Mm.
bashing yourself like you perceived others when you were a kid? It's like we have to change. Have to change those tapes in our head, those recordings in our head, and stop beating ourselves up because this creates the shame cycle. And if you look at the emotional scale, shame is right there at the bottom next to powerlessness. It's a very low frequency to be involved with. So, one thing that I have my clients do is definitely to have a lot of grace on themselves. And what that leads to is grace for others because forgiveness is such a huge part of the healing process. We have to learn how to forgive ourselves and to know that we did the best we could with what we were given, just like everyone else does. And so, self compassion is just, it's vital. It's vital. It's so necessary.
Exactly. That's great. Lovely. Great. So, thank you, Tammy, for so much for sharing your incredible journey and these powerful insights with us today. And I know that so many of our listeners will be inspired to take that first step towards healing. And dear listeners, if you loved today's episode, be sure to follow Pleasure Principles for more honest conversations like this one. So, and another, always remember that healing might take time, but You are so worth it. So keep taking care of yourselves. And yes, we will catch you soon next time. Thank you so much.